let's talk about the two flavors of parallel action. So, there are two types of parallel action groups, I should say, in Ludio. The first is a regular parallel action group, and the second is a smart parallel action group. Let's talk about smart parallel action groups. So a smart parallel action group is an action group where you're going to push all the actions in that group. You're gonna essentially create multiple copies of all the actions in this group, and you might push them to different players or push them to different groups of people. So the way you specify a smart parallel action group is in the action group you need to add this block that says parallel, and you say it's a smart parallel action, and you say how many copies of this action do you want. Okay, now why would you use a smart parallel group? Let's motivate that first. Let's imagine that every player needs to take an action, but each action needs to be customized and personalized to that player, right? So you want everyone to play a card, but they all have different valid cards that you can play. And you really don't want to have to write one copy for every single player because you don't know how many players are in the game. You'd have to do it in a really janky way. So the smart parallel action just clones a bunch of actions and lets you customize each one to a different person. That's the main way it's used, right? So this smart parallel action, it creates num players copies of this action group. So it's going to do this for each single player in the game. And you can see here that when you create a smart parallel action group, you get access to this hard-coded cached variable called smart parallel action index, or SPA index for short. So SPA index just tells you which copy you're dealing with. So what's the use of this? So let's look at this action in this action group, right? I've taken this action from Rat in the Kitchen. So in Rat in the Kitchen, every player gets a private announcement telling them what their cards are for this round. And obviously that's different for each player. So we have a notification action in this action group. And the notification header says, hey player, your cards for this particular round are... And now you see the value of the smart parallel action group because this variable, which is the name of the player, is going to be different for every single player. And so it helps that we've made a bunch of copies of this action, because then what we can do is we can use the SPA index to tell this action which player we're talking about. Okay, so I know this is a little bit annoying to read. Okay, great. So this first argument, which says the player's name, is the SPA indexed player in the list of players, right? We're using that player, and then we're creating a list out of that, and we're getting the player's name from that. Okay, so it's just kind of like a way to do a bunch of actions in parallel so that you can customize each one to a particular situation, and you can use the SPA index to do that. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Again, it's well documented, and you can look at examples of how this is done. So that's the first type of parallel action, is a smart parallel action. Let's look at another type of action, of parallel action. Okay, so the second type of parallel action group is an independent parallel group, or just like a regular one. And all this is that you are saying this action group is going to happen in parallel with some other action group. And that other action group I'm also going to mark as an independent parallel group. So this is when you don't want parallel actions to be dependent on the individual player. You're trying to do something a bit more general. So for example, in Mafia, everyone is taking their night actions at the same time, right? So you're pushing one action to the Mafia, you're pushing one action to the police officer, you're pushing one action to the bodyguard. So that's not, at the level of the player, that's at the level of the role or the team. So in that case, you use an independent parallel group. And you say, okay, this is the Mafia action group, and it's in parallel to the bodyguard action group, which is in parallel to the police action group. So the use case is very simple. You just say type independent, and then all of those things will happen at the same time. Now, there is some complexity here. If you have a but let me show you how complex it can get, just so you're aware of what's possible. And once you're aware that it's possible, then we can talk about the syntax if it comes up. Okay. So this is an action group. It's a parallel action group. If you have a bunch of parallel action groups, you have to specify which one the last one is. So one of your parallel action groups is going to have this variable that says is last equals true. You can also have action groups that are in parallel that depend on other parallel action groups. So for example, in witchcraft, for example, the witch can short circuit the witch trial, right? And in order for them to do that, both action groups need to be aware of the other one. So the witch trial can witch circuit, the witch trial can short circuit the witch's desire to curse the village, and the witch's desire to curse the village can short circuit the ongoing witch trial. So they both depend on each other. So when you have situations like that, there's a syntax for it, but basically it's not an independent parallel group, it's a dependent parallel group, and you have to specify the conditions under which you would short circuit a different action group. Okay, so I won't get into that here. It's in the documentation, and we can, if you have a situation like that, we can talk about the syntax for it. Okay, so parallel groups are very powerful for just pushing actions to multiple people at the same time, and it just saves you time in the implementation, especially when it's a smart parallel group, because then you don't have to write an individual copy for each single player. Okay, that's it.